Great. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm Tori Vanderlyn with PreventConnect, and you are joining us today for evaluating social norms and social marketing campaigns for sexual and domestic violence prevention. PreventConnect is a national project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, or CalCASA. So on today's web conference, we are going to be talking about evaluating social norms and social marketing, and we have a few objectives for that. We want you all to be able to describe key concepts and principles for evaluating social norms, change in social marketing campaigns. We'll also discuss evaluation approaches, measures, and indicators for evaluation too. And we're going to dive into some examples of how to evaluate social norms, change, and social marketing. So this work really ties into what the guidance from the CDC Division of Violence Prevention technical packages have told us. And so we're specifically looking at how social norms, change, and social marketing comes out in the STOP-SV and the Preventing IPV technical packages. So we see that at the Promoting Social Norms to Protect Against Violence level of the STOP-SV technical package, and we also see it appear several places in the Preventing IPV technical package with teaching safe and healthy relationship skills, engaging influential adults and peers, and creating protective environments. And the technical packages also say changing social norms, including harmful gender norms, is another aspect that cross-cuts many of the strategies in this package. Challenging these norms is a key aspect of those strategies that I just read out to you. And you all were notified in your reminder emails, and we'll say it again here too, that this web conference builds off of concepts from a recent PreventConnect web conference, Clearing Up Social Norms, Change, and Social Marketing for Sexual and Domestic Violence Prevention. The slides and recordings for that web conference are available online. And that web conference is really a great foundation to build off the concepts that we're talking about today. So in that web conference, we distinguish the two definitions between social norms, change, and social marketing, with a really important distinction of social marketing seeks to change behavior. And our first presenter will go into that in a little more detail as well. So before we introduce our guests, we would love to hear from you all. How are you using social marketing strategies or changing social norms to prevent sexual and intimate partner violence in your work? So Ashley has pasted that question into the text chat. If you all could take a moment and respond to that question in the text chat there, while you all are typing, I will introduce all three of our guests today. So we are so excited to have such a great group of guest presenters to guide you all in this conversation today. We have Patrick Cook, who is a communications specialist with the Violence Prevention Technical Assistance Center. We have Maury Nation, who's a professor of human and organizational development at Vanderbilt University. And we also have Sally Lasky, who is an evaluation coordinator with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. And so I'm going to introduce Patrick first in a second, but I do see that folks are already chatting away about what social marketing strategies or how they're changing social norms to prevent violence. So we see folks talking about violence-free workplace initiatives. Sarah DeGue, super excited to learn more and read more about the social marketing campaign you're working on. Falguna talking about greening efforts to promote social connectedness and cohesion. Awesome. We also have folks talking about social norms for sober sex versus intoxicated sex. Folks are also working on more stuff with social marketing and creating protective environments. So really getting at that community level prevention. Folks who are engaging men and boys through social norms change too. Wow, there are so many and they keep coming in, and I'm so excited to read more of these later too. But I am going to pass it off to Patrick so Patrick can get us started and give us some of that base level understanding about social norms change and social marketing and evaluation. So Patrick, take it away.
Great. Thanks very much, Tori, and thank you for having me, and I'm really thrilled to be joining all of you. It's a essential topic and one that I've been working on for a number of years. Just a quick background, I am indeed the communication specialist with CDC's Violence Prevention Technical Assistance Center, and I've been in commercial and social marketing for a number of years, to almost 30. And about half of that I've been working in violence and suicide prevention, as well as working on some other issues related to chronic disease prevention. I approach this as a social marketer. To be transparent about my affiliations, I'm also the president of the International Social Marketing Association, so that's very much part of my professional practice. And I'm going to be talking, just setting up our conversation for today by doing a quick review of social norms change and social marketing and what are the similarities and the differences. And then from a practitioner's perspective, what are some of the key concepts and principles to be thinking about as you're designing, developing, implementing, and ultimately wanting to evaluate either a social norms change or a social marketing campaign. To review, and Tori mentioned it right at the top of our web conference here, there was an excellent web conference last July, I think it was, and the link is there in the chat box on these two topics. But to review, social norms change, as defined by the CDC on their Veto Violence website, is really looking at those ways to improve the social cultural environment, and that's, the values, the attitudes, and most particularly the beliefs to counteract some of the factors that both facilitate violence and inhibit individuals and institutions from intervening. And, I like to go back to a bit of the history of social norms change, and it came out of the work of two American researchers, Perkin and Berkowitz, who back in the 1980s were doing some work around binge drinking, and they saw that there was quite a disparity between what the college-age kids were thinking was normal drinking behavior or prevalent drinking behavior and what it actually was. And so the thinking was, and the interventions that they designed sought to use communication strategies and tactics to change those perceptions about what was happening on the college campuses. And the thinking was, ultimately, if you change those beliefs and you ultimately will change those unwritten social rules and help change the behaviors related to binge drinking. Now, of course, social norms change. We apply to many different public health issues, including, of course, sexual violence and domestic violence prevention. But I think what's important to keep in mind, social norms change is really looking at those beliefs and changing those beliefs so that that enables behavior change that we're ultimately looking for. Social marketing, on the other hand, is similar. I mean, they both have social in the name, so they do share that. Social marketing came out of a somewhat earlier and slightly different background. It came out of the commercial marketing sector when two American researchers, two American marketing professors thought, well, why can't we use the practices and principles of commercial marketing and apply them to challenging social issues? So Kotler and Zaltman wrote this article back in 1972 called Social Marketing, an Approach to Planned Social Change. And their idea was taking those practices and principles and applying them to different topics that really we had struggled to address. Most importantly, things like smoking and tobacco cessation. And then ultimately we started using it around HIV/AIDS, and of course have done a number of campaigns across multiple things. And I've been involved in some violence prevention and suicide prevention social marketing campaigns. Even though they share attributes of social norms campaigns, social marketing campaigns tend to be more focused on the behaviors, and ultimately the goal is to change behaviors that are going to be to the benefit of the individuals and the communities that we're working with. And I think that's an important defining characteristic because, of course, in commercial marketing, the benefit of the marketing itself is to the company, the organization, the corporation that is doing the marketing. So, in the case of Apple, it's they benefit because we go out and buy the latest hot new phone. Whereas in social marketing, the benefit is to the consumer or the audience or the community that we're trying to engage. So in the case of domestic violence, for example, we're trying to persuade folks to buy a hotline or to call a hotline to their benefit and ultimately so they can live a life without violence. There is also, sometimes people sometimes use social marketing and social media interchangeably. I think it's important to unpack the two. Social marketing, as I just talked about, is really a kind of a multimodal, comprehensive community level and social level intervention that uses the principles and practices of commercial marketing to lower barriers and increase the benefits of behavior change, whereas social media is really just a collection of technologies that allow us to communicate with each other online, and so it can be one to many, many to many. Now, social norms change and social marketing campaigns, we almost always use social media as a critical strategy, and some of the tactics that we use are social media, but we also use many others, of course, advertising and public service announcements and community events and influences and all of that. So even though you might see some firms advertising that they do social marketing, sometimes what they're just talking about is using social media individually, and that's not what we're talking about today. I think what's helpful to understand both the similarities and the differences between the two approaches to community level change is understanding the underlying theories of change behind the two practices. So in social norms, excuse me, as I just mentioned, it came out of this insight that there was often a misperception of what was accepted behavior or common behavior amongst a group. And so we, in a social norms change campaign, what we're doing is using communication strategies and tactics to change or correct those misperceptions. So ultimately, that we change the social norms, change the social rules, which will impact, as the theory goes, those behaviors. Social marketing, we tend to start immediately with those behaviors and look specifically at the behaviors that are adversely impacting the community and understanding what are those specific behaviors that if we were to change them, they would have an impact on what we're trying to accomplish. And we do that through, again, the application of commercial marketing techniques, whether that's market research and audience segmentation, applying the marketing, what's called the marketing mix, which are the 4 Ps for some of you who know that, to lower the barriers and ultimately increase the benefits of change in behavior, again, a behavior or behaviors that will benefit the community that we're working with. Excuse me, 'tis the season for the cold, and my cold is still with me. From a practitioner's perspective, I think when we're talking about whether it's social norms or social marketing campaign, in order to evaluate it or in order to determine if we're being effective, we want to set ourselves up right from the very beginning to ensure that we can do an evaluation. And you're going to hear some great stuff from my two co-presenters on how you actually go about doing this. But when you're thinking about planning and starting to develop that communication campaign, I think some core concepts or principles to keep in mind is the campaigns, obviously, you want to use the one that will advance your theory of change. So if it's about changing social norms, the social norms change approach is going to make the most sense for what you're trying to do. It's ultimately about changing behaviors. And of course, social marketing is probably the better intervention to be looking at. And the communication campaigns, whether social norms or social marketing, has to be, of course, aligned with your logic model, whether that's over across your entire initiative or the logic model of a specific program. And ultimately, it's you want to support with the campaign work the program goals. So those three kind of principles are really critical up front. I like to think of it as
Patrick.
Yeah.
Sorry to break up your flow. We have a question in the text chat for you from Kristen. So the Social Norms Center notes in their third frequently asked question that someone confused both of those theories of change, applying social marketing approaches and strategies to the goal of changing social norms. And we just wanted to know what are your thoughts on how they framed that of being able to fuse the two theories?
Okay, if I think I'm understanding the question, I like to say that often you can use this, or my understanding and the approach that we've used in the past is sometimes changing the social norms is one part or the beginning of a social marketing campaign where you're ultimately trying to change those behaviors. So changing some of the norms around it is important in order to get to the behavior change in the end. Sometimes the approach is really to change the perceived understanding of what's going on in a particular community. So you're focused on using those communication strategies to change those perceptions.
Thanks, Patrick. And it looks like Deborah just kind of summarized what you had just said, too, in the text chat. So I will jump in again if we have further questions.
You bet. Okay. So I think I was about to say I'm a practical guy, and what I've always found helpful in order to be determine and set myself up or set ourselves up so that we can evaluate what it is we're doing with our social norms or social marketing campaign is being able to answer a pretty simple question, which is who do we want to do what, why, and when? And I think if you're able to articulate an answer to this question, you're starting to kind of get at the fundamentals of what you're trying to accomplish. And from an evaluation perspective, having and being clear about those fundamentals, what the campaign is ultimately trying to achieve, who you're trying to achieve it with, your audience, and what you're hoping is the outcome of the intervention or the campaign. That's kind of critical because when you start working with your evaluator or an evaluation lead, it'll be really important to have these fundamentals kind of clear in your mind in order for them to help and guide you in what are the best strategies and tactics to evaluate what it is you're doing. I think it's also another critical and essential part of being able to evaluate your social norms or social marketing campaign is being specific about how you get to those goals that you've articulated in the planning phase of your work. And I'm a big proponent of making sure that you have goals, but also you have objectives, marketing objectives that are going to allow you to measure progress towards achieving those goals. And I think many of us know that, the S.M.A.R.T acronym, but in this case, it really does apply and make a big difference that you want to make sure those marketing objectives are specific and measurable for obvious reasons, but also attainable, realistic, and something that you can do within the time frame that you have both in the campaign and the evaluation work. So to give you a concrete example, and then I'm going to turn it over to the experts who know a lot more about how to actually get this done. I want to just take the example of Coaching Boys into Men. It's a program that I know some of you, if not a lot of you, are using. It's very, evidence-based prevention program that is in use in a lot of communities. And I think when we're thinking about how do we do a communication campaign, again, social norms or social marketing, to support Coaching Boys into Men, an important place to start, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is think about the program goal. And these are the program goals pulled from Coaching Boys into Men and their materials. So we want to increase positive bystander behavior and decrease dating violence perpetration. But the campaign, of course, is going to support that, but won't be enough to accomplish that. So it's important to articulate what are the marketing goals based on those program goals. So, and a couple of examples might be, if we're doing a Coaching Boys into Men campaign in our community or across our county or something, it might be we are looking to increase the number of young men who say or do something to stop abusive behavior, or it could be the number of young men who are reporting a positive relationship with their partner in some type of evaluation tool done at the community or the school level. And then to my earlier point, it's really important to articulate how do you know you're achieving those goals, those marketing goals, by translating them into specific marketing objectives. Now, there's many more that you could do here, but just some examples of an output objective, which measures kind of the process. You could be looking at the number of marketing materials that are distributed, or it could be reach, or things like that that are related to public service announcements or ads. You might want to also be looking at, earlier point around reported behaviors, and it could be what you're getting in your school surveys or countywide surveys or things like that. And ultimately, yes, you do want to be measuring the impact. So what are the, did we see a decrease in the number of violent dating interactions, for example, that were reported to the domestic violence hotline? And of course, this is where the fabulous people like Maury and Sally come in, because they're the ones that are going to help you articulate those marketing objectives that not only are specific and measurable, but that are realistic for what it is you're trying to accomplish with the resources that you have available. So before I turn it over, just wanted to point out, from a practitioner's perspective, effective campaign, that one that can be evaluated, really has these kind of core concepts or principles embedded in it. It'll advance your theory of change, whether those are social norms change or behavior change, support your logic model, and then, of course, your campaign will be connected in and supportive of your program goal. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Ashley, I think. Or Tori?
You'll turn it back to me, Tori. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. That it's so important before we talk about evaluation to be able to have a conversation about, what are we talking about when we talk about social norms change, and what are we talking about when we say social marketing? So before we move to the point of evaluating, we're making sure that we're evaluating the right thing, and that we're catching all of those important components. So thank you for that summary. Before we introduce Maury, we would love to hear from you all. Since this web conference is on evaluating these different tools, where are you in your evaluation process for your social norms or social marketing campaigns? And Ashley has put that question in the text chat. We would love to hear from you all as we get going. And so we want to introduce Maury to the session today. We will get you promoted up to a presenter role, so you can change your slides. But Maury, how are you doing today?
I am well and excited to be here.
Great. Awesome. Well, you have the ability to advance your own slides, so I will let you take it from here.
All right. Well, thank you. And as I said, I'm just really excited to be here. And I will start by saying that I heard the term expert used a couple of times, and I honestly, that term scares me. So I will say, at least to think of myself as a fellow learner with the rest of you all, and excited to be able to talk about a project that we've been working on for a few years here that I think integrates several of the ideas that Patrick just talked about, including the concepts of social norms change, as well as using elements of social marketing as the lever for trying to promote behavioral change. So if any of you are located in Louisville, you may well be familiar with our logo here, and that's been part of the branding of the work that we've been doing around violence prevention. So before I hop in, just do my standard acknowledgements. Certainly, we appreciate the support from CDC, and want to be clear that this is our work and not necessarily the representing the opinions of CDC. But I also want to just acknowledge all of the local folks who have been both in Louisville and in Nashville, which is serving as a control site for the project, that have really taken ownership of this project in a way that I have rarely seen in a lot of the violence prevention work that I've done. So just to give you an overview of what we were trying to do in this project, it's focused on violence prevention, and we, through a process of talking with the neighborhood, and the focal neighborhood is West Louisville, in a process of talking with the residents of West Louisville, and particularly the young people, we came up with this as a way of summarizing what we hope to do in the neighborhood. So you certainly see this issue of norms related to violence, but there are several other things that really started to come through in those conversations. So the issues of race and racial identity, and also this issue of structure. That yes, there is a set of norms around young people and their beliefs as it relates to violence, but there's also a broader set of norms that kind of transcend young people, that also creates both the context and, in fact, contributes to some of the behavior that we're trying to discourage among young people. So we really wanted to find a way to take both of those things on. So we came to this actually to give you a sense of West Louisville. I mean, it is, as with many urban areas, one of the really, I would call it, relatively isolated and marginalized, both economically and racially segregated, compared to the rest of the Louisville metro area. And as a result, it has, if we look at statistics, we also see that a lot of the issues related to violence are more common in West Louisville than they are in the rest of Louisville Metro. So part of that was one of the reasons for the rationale for focusing there. But like I said, one of the things that we also wanted to understand was and appreciate was that West Louisville didn't create itself. I mean, that is that there were forces outside of West Louisville that helped to create both the neighborhood and the challenges that the neighborhood is facing. And we wanted to find a way to have this campaign also address those issues. A second thing is that we looked at the research on youth violence and the risk of factors associated with violence perpetration. And if you look across these, I mean, there's certainly these issues at the individual level, and I have highlighted some of the ones that we really wanted to key in on as it related to our campaign. Things like, the beliefs and attitudes and norms, and the exposure to violence that happens at higher rates in West Louisville. But we also wanted to if you look at the I guess it's the bottom right, that community category, is that it's really focused on what we have come to refer to as structural violence. That is this way in which the community has systematically been marginalized as it relates to economic opportunity and the concentration of poverty and limited access to just a tremendous amount of resources. So we wanted to find a way I keep coming back to that, wanting to find a way, in part because what we've heard from young people was, the intervention focused on us doesn't ring true in the absence of making sure that there is intervention that acknowledges the things that are happening to us. So what you'll see in the rest of what I described here is how we're trying to put all of this together and within the context of this campaign to promote change. So what we have decided and are implementing is to reduce violence, youth violence, by changing social norms. And this is norms related to youth violence, but also what we refer to as structural violence. And what we believe is at the core of that, I was going to say in Louisville, but I would say even more broadly, is the legacy of white supremacy, and to really try to challenge some of those norms as well. We also believe that this campaign should focus on promoting youth development, and we do that by through the concept of socio-political development. And for those of you who are not familiar with that concept, we're talking about things like critical consciousness and awareness of both the interpersonal elements of neighborhood and kind of individual level influences on violence, but also understanding how political systems work and economic systems work to also contribute to one's experience. And then finally, we also wanted to have a behavioral component of this. So we wanted to make sure that there was some way of giving agency, and we do that through focusing on civic engagement. That is, with this knowledge that there would be an opportunity to do something. So to describe our implementation model, and I apologize because this is a busy slide, is that it really started with the campaign design team, which included us as a research team, but it also included a group that we refer to as the LIVE Fellows. This is the Louisville Youth Voices Against Violence. And these are young people from West Louisville. And it was really designed to focus on, tell us about your experience and the messages and issues that you think need to be dealt with to prevent violence. And what we learned from that was that, yes, there are these issues that are interpersonal. And you can see some of that in the second column. But you also have all of these things around learning their own history. I mean, West Louisville is the neighborhood that Muhammad Ali grew up in. And we found that many of the kids didn't know a lot of the proud history of that neighborhood. And we're wondering why. I mean, why are these not the types of things that we are able to learn? So As you go across to the third column, you see that the goal of the campaign then is to introduce these positive messages and to kind of make people aware of history, but to also give an opportunity to create dialogue and to kind of focus on those elements of agency that would allow young people to actually change both themselves and their community. Just a little bit more on the Live Fellows. These are just a wonderful group of young people, and they have rotated, several groups or cohorts have rotated over the course of the project, but they have just taken, to say they've taken the lead, I think underestimates just how much ownership they have taken in this process. And one of the things that I would say is that for many of them, and I've heard from several of them, is that this is the first time their story is being told. I mean, that is, for so many times prevention programs have focused on what they need to do to change, or different ways to change them, but not so much honoring their experience and their story. And that in and of itself has given them some a sense of agency and empowerment. Now, the campaigns, we decided to use a variety of different media. So we're using both traditional media in terms of billboards and bus shelters and radio and television. But one of the things that we quickly learned was that social media was really where so much of young people's attention was turned. And just to give you a sense, we started out thinking that Facebook would be kind of the big medium, and quickly heard from the young people that none of them really use Facebook, and that we really needed to focus on things like Snapchat and Instagram as a way, depending on the age group that we wanted to hit with the various messages. So what we ended up with is essentially 3 rounds of our campaign. The first round is we refer to as Pride, and with the subtitle being "Our Power Comes from Our People," and this was really focused on understanding the history of African Americans and in general, but also specifically in West Louisville. And what I will also add is that the artwork and what hopefully we'll have a chance to share links to some of the videos and such. All of that is young people generated. That is, they helped to develop the messages and worked with artists, with media professionals to help fashion it in a way that would be appealing. So the T-shirts and such, if you're interested, you can actually get them. And that's one of the things that we found, is that people are interested and often will pay for a lot of the campaign materials. The second round of the campaign was focused on peace, and with the subtext being "No peace, no justice," but really, again, putting out a variety of different messages and accompanying social media content, so videos, text, spoken word poetry, music, a variety of different ways of communicating these types of messages. And then the third round, which is presently wrapping up over the next couple of months, is focused on prevention, and with the theme of "Let's get animated and make change." And the idea that you'll see across all of these is that change really comes from us getting activated by the things that we know cause youth violence. And it's interesting because so much of that message isn't about the interpersonal piece as much as recognizing the contextual pieces that contribute to many of the norms that have been adopted by young people. Yeah.
Yeah, this has been really great to learn more about the campaign, and folks are super interested as you start talking about the campaign evaluation. If the LIVE Fellows were involved in the evaluation, and if the LIVE Fellows were involved, how did you involve them in the evaluation of this campaign?
Okay. So, yes, we really wanted to think about evaluation through a variety of mechanisms, and both through quantitative data and qualitative data. So, yes, the LIVE Fellows actually helped with selecting the measures. I mean, and again, because we wanted to get a sense from them of what types of things we should be asking. But one of the things that, and I, again, I work with both master's and doctoral students to do this type of work. And when it came time to do the qualitative interviews, it was amazing to see that we got our best interviews from the ones that were conducted by the LIVE Fellows, not our doctoral students. And it was because they had ways of asking questions and really trying to unpack the responses. I think it also was an element of the level of comfort that the interviewees felt with the LIVE Fellows, who came from their neighborhoods and looked like them and had very similar experiences to them. So what you see in our evaluation is that we certainly wanted to do some of the traditional process evaluations. That is, how well are we doing in delivering our campaign? But then most of what I'll focus on here real quickly, I know I'm running out of time here, is on the outcome evaluation. So in terms of a process, we put it on television, and cable. We selected outlets that were specifically, had high usage by the target population, that is West Louisville, and particularly African American children and adolescents. Same with the radio and Pandora. So one of the things that we use, particularly for the online channels, is geofencing. So when people were in West Louisville, those little pop-ups that you get on your phone about various types of advertising, it was actually our logo and links to the campaign material that you would get just from being in West Louisville. In terms of social media, I mean, one of the things that we also learned, as I mentioned, Instagram is much better than Facebook, but we also learned that YouTube is maybe, in terms of the depth of engagement, is maybe better than Instagram. I mean, that is that people really, spent time with our videos on YouTube. And I can just say, from a person who goes up, I don't live in West Louisville, but I go up pretty regularly, is that the LIVE Fellows are, kind of minor celebrities. You walk into a restaurant and they get recognized as a result of the campaign. We did ask in our surveys kind of the level of exposure to any of the campaign. And one of the things that we found is that, there was exposure both in West Louisville and in Louisville Metro, in part because of the nature of the types of media that we were using. Now, in terms of outcomes, if I had to say one of the major takeaways for this type of work is quantitative data is important. Don't just depend on the quantitative data. You should, if at all possible, try to do some type of interviews or focus groups or something to help unpack some of the results that you may find in your quantitative data. That has been immensely helpful to us to understand some things that we were having trouble making sense of by just doing the quantitative analysis. You see that we're also not just depending on surveys. Surveys have been really important, but we're also looking at administrative data, and we're doing what I refer to as policy and practice surveillance. That is, are there ways in which we are seeing change happening? And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. These are changes that aren't necessarily going to be captured in a survey or even in administrative data, but we know that they're important because of the potential impact that they have on the target community. How are we measuring the proximal indicators? A lot of this is coming from the survey data that I mentioned. And we're actually surveying both young people from West Louisville, Louisville Metro, and that's in part because of busing. So we end up hitting a little bit of everybody. And then we also have a comparison group here in Nashville that are answering similar types of questions.
Hey, Maury.
Yeah.
So before we move on, we just got a really great question from Pat in the text chat. How did you collect data on the policy and perceptions items?
Okay. So the policy and practice surveillance, is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that I think there have been a couple of ways in which we've tried to do it. One is that we've tried to do it systematically by looking at monitoring newspaper and media stories related to West Louisville and to youth violence. And we're looking at things like narrative. That was kind of at the heart of this project, was looking at how things were being framed, because we believed that how they were framed would then affect what types of interventions would happen. So what kinds of language are being used? At the beginning of this, we actually had elected officials talking about the young people in West Louisville making analogs to terrorists. That's that's problematic on so many different levels. That to be able to see that in comparison to something that's just been happening in the last few weeks, where they are talking about, through the mayor's office, an office focused on social justice youth development. Now, that's not. We don't believe that's accidental. I mean, in light of a lot of the engagement that young people themselves have taken on as it relates to having been embedded in this campaign and discussing the broader contextual issues and the role that city government has in it. So we're trying to do it both by monitoring media and the types of narratives about youth in West Louisville, but we're also doing it just by looking at these events that are happening. And I'll give you a specific example here in just a second that I think comes directly out of some of the knowledge and agency that young people have experienced as a result of the campaign. So if you look at the survey indicators and the way in which we're using those, I have them in 3 different categories. Proximal indicators, those were things that we thought might change relatively quickly. And then intermediate and impact indicators were the things that we were thinking that it's going to take some time for the campaign to develop before we might see the full effects of on these types of indicators. And what I will say is that we're looking at outcome data now and have really found it exciting. We hope to be presenting on some of that here soon, but that many of the things that we hoped would happen are being borne out in our data. I'm going to get to your question, I'm going to go through this really quickly. But one of the things I mentioned about the importance of qualitative data, and some of it was around these types of things. That is, we found that in terms of norms, that there were no differences between West Louisville and the rest of Louisville Metro on these types of questions. And yet, where we did find the big differences were in the exposure and the meaning making that young people were kind of making of their experiences. So it really spoke to us again about this idea of honoring what young people see happening to them as much as trying to focus on getting them to change. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that is all so important to realize, and I think that really speaks to how well you all involve youth in this, in both the development and in the evaluation of this campaign, and how you were really able to move the needle on some of those things. So we thought this would be a really great chance to go to our audience before you finish up your part of the presentation, Maury. But before we do that, I wanted to move back a couple slides because we do have a question about, and I know this would come up on the practice session too, where it's like, well, gosh, how many survey questions can we fit in the PowerPoint slide? But we do have a question about, do you have specific things you're measuring for each indicator? Like, what did you use to measure civic engagement? And Maury, I'm wondering if this is an opportunity that you'd want to share some of those with us, and we'd be happy to publish some of those in a useful resources document to accompany this subconference. Because I know you had mentioned earlier using a lot of different measurements and surveys and all of that. And Deborah says, yes, please publish that.
Yeah, I will say we're happy to share. One of the things that we did try to focus on is using public domain measures. And happy to send the measures along with the sourcing of them, so the citations for the papers from which they came. But yes, we do have specific scales associated with each of these outcomes. As it relates to civic engagement, we really broke that into 3 things, and I think I have it reflected here. Knowledge, that is this sense of knowing what to do, or different ways to be engaged. But then we actually also ask about their sense of efficacy. Did they feel like they could do it and that they could make a difference? And then finally, we asked them specifically about had they been doing certain things, like have they participated in a rally? Have they written a letter? Um, one of the things that was difficult around civic engagement for young people is that you can't really ask about voting, which is maybe the most obvious type of civic participation. But we did ask about, helping out in the community. Do they volunteer? And volunteering for different types of things, because when it gets to socio-political development as one of the outcomes that we're interested in, we're hoping that the types of engagement evolve over time. That is, that they become much more critical in the ways in which they decide to become engaged. So yes, we're happy to share those measures, and also happy to talk with people about how we came to the decisions that we did about those measures. There is, I would also say that it's nice to be able to use things like the administrative data and both from schools as well as from things like the gun violence archive, where you have things that can help tell the story that aren't just about self-report. The nice thing about that is that these types of data are increasingly available and accessible publicly. So I would encourage you to consider accessing those as well.
Thanks, Maury. That's all super important for folks, and I love that you mentioned using publicly available data to support the story from your own evaluation. Folks have been answering in the text chat how they are measuring, or how they are currently measuring the impact of their social norms and social marketing campaigns. I want to invite folks to, I know on our last one, where our last text chat question, we asked folks where they're at in their evaluation process, and a lot of folks said that they're just planning or maybe even pre-planning their evaluations of these campaigns. So if folks have ideas for the types of measures that they would want to use or would want to learn more about for how they plan to measure impact, please feel free to chime into the conversation in the text chat there, and keep on typing your responses as Maury, you take us through the end.
Well, and I see Deborah's question about, did you have someone kind of reviewing news and newspaper and TV? Yes, we actually did pull all of the newspaper articles that we could find. We tried to develop relationships with all of the local television stations as well, both from the perspective of looking at what they are currently doing, but also trying to, they were a target of intervention as much as the young people, because they also help set narrative. And in many ways, were in a more powerful position to change the types of narratives than just focusing on the young people themselves. So what kinds of changes that we hope to be able to impact? I mean, we certainly have seen young people change their minds, and I wish I could spend easily 45 minutes telling stories about young people and how they have changed the way in which they understand themselves and their situation from a really often negative perception of both themselves and their neighborhoods, because that was the only way to make sense of what they saw relative to the rest of Louisville. and to understand that, no, this was a much more complex story. And as a result of that, the second point is that they've gotten much better at describing history and structure and how it contributes to their experience and to the outcomes that they see in their neighborhood. I will say this: I've never been more proud of a group of young people than to see them with Rand Paul, their senator, really very respectfully challenging this idea that that the violence in West Louisville was just because there were bad seeds, and to the point of making him uncomfortable, which I just found it really interesting that they were in a position to be able to do that. And then the how do we fix it? And I'll close here by giving you a specific example I mentioned in terms of policy and practice surveillance. One of the things that happened, and again, if we have someone from Louisville, you may remember this, is that Family Dollar had applied for a liquor license to sell liquor from their stores in West Louisville. And the young people came in when they saw that and said to the YVPC staff, what are y'all going to do about this? and we were able to turn it around to say, well, what are y'all going to do about this? And they literally took the lead. I mean, of developing, doing door-to-door, getting signatures. They spoke to city council, and actually, ultimately, the council turned down the request, the Family Dollar license request. It's those types of things that now they have experienced a little success, and they now believe they can change the world, which is something that we really, really hope would come from this. So what have we learned? I mean, we've certainly feel like that we've had good saturation and exposure among the population that we hope to be able to touch. We also feel like we understand the issues of norms and behavior in a little bit of a different way now than we did going into it. That it's a much more complex relationship, and that we can't really just focus on one piece of it without, especially the piece that involves the least powerful, i.e. young people living in a marginalized neighborhood, without acknowledging many of the other pieces that involve much more powerful and much more systematic effects. And then the last thing that I would say is that in terms of socio-political awareness, one of the things that we are seeing, and this has been kind of emerging from the literature on socio-political development, is that as kids gain this awareness and this critical consciousness, even if they don't act on it, their own behavior and their own sense of resilience is improved by having this type of knowledge. So we're excited to see where this goes. We're in our last year, and as I said before, hoping to be able to publish some of this over the next few months.
Thank you, Maury. This has been such a rich conversation in not only how to develop these kinds of campaigns, but where do we even begin to evaluate them? And it was so great to be able to hear from you about all the different methods that you're using, between the quantitative work with the surveys and having that qualitative aspect with the interviews, how you're involving youth in that, and what are some of the the organizing and community change activities that are coming out of this. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. We're so excited to continue sharing resources from you too. And so while you were finishing your presentation, folks were talking about how they are measuring the impact or how they would want to measure the impact of their social norms and social marketing campaigns. And folks are talking about using campus climate surveys and using focus groups. So really excited to hear more examples from folks too. And we have Sally joining us, and Sally is going to talk more about how do we take what we learned from Maury and apply it directly to our work in sexual and intimate partner violence prevention, as well as provide some examples for us. So Sally, we are ready for you.
Hello. I am just feeling really excited and overwhelmed at the same time with Maury's fantastic example and with Patrick giving us this grounding that, yeah, we can do this. We know how to do this. So I just want to say first off that some of the examples that I'm going to be sharing come from, number one, where my work in sexual violence began as a prevention educator at the University of New Hampshire. I often go to my early lessons and some of my mentors when I'm trying to learn about new things, and also trying to pull out some evaluation strategies that were very interesting to me, or I thought they might be able to be something that folks could do regardless of the level of resources and support and capacity that they have for evaluation. So I just want to thank PreventConnect for providing this space for us to talk with others about strategies and approaches so that we can get to the next level of our prevention work. I'm also really relieved to know that this isn't going to be the end of our conversation. We're going to keep talking about this. And I know that there are a lot of you on the line that have a lot more to share about different approaches. But I'm also really excited that there are several of you that mentioned that you're just at the beginning of planning your program, your campaign, and your evaluation work. So I hope that some of these little tidbits that kind of stood out to me when I talked with colleagues about what they're learning about evaluating their programs and campaigns, that they might resonate with you. So in our office, we always begin a project by talking about our primary audience. We often wander into conversations about a secondary audience, a third area of priorities, and basically then talking about how we want to reach everyone. And then someone will gently bring us back to our priority or primary target audience group. So I don't know how many folks can relate to that process, but I think it's a really good one to go through that conversation, help you prioritize where to start, but also look at audiences that you might want to come back to for a next project. Having a narrow and specific focus and defining your target audience early on will definitely be a key element in having a successful program. We know that one single strategy won't work for all members of an entire community. This leads us to a second lesson that we are learning, and that is about having that community level data and specific data from the target audience that will help to ensure that your program and or your message will be seen as credible, having community buy-in, and will be built on the actual lived experiences of community members. I feel like Maury provided some excellent examples from those youth leaders that were really seen as champions in their community and being able to move the campaign to new stages. So having that community level data about social norms and sexual violence specifically, which is the areas that we focus on, is crucial to identifying the misperceptions that you want to address in your social norming work and what behaviors you and the community members want to promote. This could be as simple as having coffee with target audience members and doing key informant interviews, or offering pizza or tacos and holding focus groups to hear their thoughts. Doing this work upfront requires thought, but it will save you time and money down the line. There are a couple other things that we have been learning. This has been a huge decade of learning lessons about messaging in the sexual violence prevention field. We can take our research with the Berkeley Media Studies Group about effective messaging for sexual violence prevention and apply it to and connect it with the specific evaluations about effective messaging for social norms change. Evaluation can help us to develop and test messages with target audiences. I'm glad to see in the chat that a lot of you are already planning to do that. While the context is often complex for this work that we're doing, the most successful messages are often ones that are simple, that use plain language, and we've also learned in our sexual violence prevention work that using positive messaging and inviting people in to the conversation in a way that empowers them to take action often works best. This doesn't mean that we can't combat complex issues of racism, homophobia, as we see from the examples that Maury provided. We actually can do this to show the interconnections between sexual and intimate partner violence and other structural violence. We just need to take the time and work with folks to find the language that means something to that target audience and will influence them. If you're creating a brand for your social norming program, which is often encouraged, or using using that in your social marketing campaign, one thing that we're learning is it's important to make sure that the norm is the focus point of that brand, and that using multiple strategies for your message delivery is going to help you. Maury highlighted that they have had several rounds of the campaign with different focus areas. Folks have found that it's best to limit the number of social norms you focus on for greater impact and adoption. So start with one or two, and you can build on them in subsequent years. Before I jump into some specific examples from the field and some of their measures that they've been using, I think we're going to do a quick poll. When I first start, I'm going to share some information from the Know Your Power social marketing campaign.
Thanks, Sally. And yes, we do want to know, since we will be talking specifically about the Know Your Power social marketing campaign, we want to know from folks, how familiar are you with the Know Your Power social marketing campaign? And Sally, those results are broadcasting live to everyone right now, so you can see a lot of the folks who are participating are not familiar at all with the Know Your Power social marketing campaign.
Well, lucky me, then I won't bore people when I provide some of the detail. Great.
Oh, Sally, you could never bore people. I'm going to take this poll away so you can tell us more about the Know Your Power social marketing campaign.
All right, so let's dig in. So researchers at the University of New Hampshire learned about the effectiveness of the Know Your Power bystander social marketing campaign through a series of evaluation over almost a decade. So this nationally recognized program focuses on reducing sexual and relationship violence and stalking on college campuses. The campaign consists of a series of images which portray scenarios that highlight the important role all members of the community have in ending sexual assault, relationship violence, and stalking. On the slide here is an example of one of their images, and the entire campaign has images of model active bystander behaviors that target audience members, and this campaign was actually initially created for first-year college students. And the the behaviors that are modeled are meant to highlight behaviors that could be used in situations where violence is occurring, has occurred, or has the potential to occur. So it has often been used in combination with the Bringing in the Bystander in-person prevention program. And in fact, both of the programs that I'm going to talk about are connected to or can be used with or are part of a larger, more comprehensive prevention program, very much like or aligned with the components that Murray talked about in the youth violence example. So the campaign currently has 25 images that can be used, and these are on 11 by 17 posters, table tents, bookmarks, postcards. There are computer pop-up screen options, bus wraps, and website information. The campaign logo can also be used to be put on products such as water bottles, gym bags, buttons, and flashlights. New images are continually being developed, and the campaign images and products can be customized. They actually are a part of a package that communities can purchase. So what did this team learn from their evaluation of the campaign images? They showed that exposure to the Know Your Power campaign was found to increase target audience members' knowledge of how to safely intervene in cases of sexual and relationship violence, increase their willingness to get involved to reduce violence, and increase the likelihood that they have acted as an active bystander in a situation where sexual or relationship violence is about to occur, is occurring, or did occur. So I want to talk a little bit about how they learned this. So what did they do? As I mentioned, they did a series of evaluations over multiple years. Ashley has been kind enough to share a wonderful article that Sharon Potter and Jane Stapleton did going through all of their evaluation practices and what they learned from them. So I really encourage folks to take, 15 minutes and look through that. I'm going to give you some of the big picture highlights. This is one of our most evaluated social norms marketing campaigns in our field right now. So I think it's helpful to go through the process they went through. So beginning in 2004, they began with a formative evaluation of the initial poster campaign. When thinking about evaluation methods and strategies, I think it's great to think about who your partners are or could be. Being part of a university community, the evaluation team was able to create what they called a multidisciplinary media campaign work group. And this work group helped them to design, implement, and evaluate the campaign. Members represented various departments and constituency group within the target community and were selected for their key knowledge that they had about the community. The majority of the members were actively involved in providing violence against women prevention education and support services within the community. However, there were several members that were invited to participate because of their interest and experience in graphic design and general education of students regarding social issues. Opportunities for partnership development were significant. So here's a little rundown of how they organized this formative evaluation. The work group defined the target audience of the first-year college students and created the initial design and slogans. A focus group to review the draft posters was conducted with the target audience. They were given an anonymous survey assessing their knowledge regarding violence against women on that particular campus. Focus group participants were then shown the media campaign prototypes and asked for their feedback. They were asked if they thought that the materials made effective points. They were asked, did you think the scenes depicted on each of the posters were realistic? Qualitative data during these focus groups led to changes in the appearances of the models, the background scenery in some cases, and in the graphics on the media campaign posters. Their next step was implementing a quasi-experimental evaluation of the revised campaign. One campus community, they were able to recruit 145 first-year students to participate in this experimental evaluation. The students, they had one control group, which was one residence hall, and one intervention group, which was another residence hall. Residents in 4 randomly selected floors in each of those 2 residence halls were gathered by their respective hall directors and RAs with, of course, food and soft drinks to complete a pre-test survey about their knowledge of the role of bystanders in reducing violence against women. The posters from the media campaign were then hung up in different places on those 4 randomly selected floors in the experimental dorm participating in the research, and posters were not hung, of course, in the control dorm. Additionally, the residence hall directors and assistants in both of the dorms agreed to refrain from posting materials that address violence against women during the 2 weeks that the bystander-oriented media campaign was being piloted. And I think this is important if you're looking to do evaluation work in a campus setting. There's so much happening around providing education that this is something that's important to talk about and think about how your evaluation process will look at what the distinct impact of the campaign that you're evaluating might be having. A pretest was conducted prior to the launch of the intervention, and at the end of the 2-week period, students that had filled out the pretest in the control group were offered the opportunity to come back together for lots more pizza and participate in follow-up research focusing on ways to reduce violence against women. The post-test instrument mirrored the pretest, with the exception of some additional questions for the experimental group that focused on the media campaign itself. The measures used for this evaluation include the knowledge of intervention scale that was created by Banyard et al. In 2005, which they include information about in the article that Ashley presented.
Hey,
Additionally,
Sally.
yes.
Yeah, so this story of the evaluation and the measures, it's so useful for folks. But I also want to acknowledge that we only have 2 minutes left in the web conference, and I know you have one other really awesome example that I want folks to be able to hear that one too.
Yes, thank you so much. So I will just say we're really excited about a tool that came out, which is that readiness to change scale. So please email us more about that. I do also want to talk about another program that was developed. It's a homegrown program for middle school community level prevention, also around dating violence and sexual violence. I want to point out that there are a few things that are different about this approach. One is that the evaluators in this multi-year project, because they're focusing on community level prevention, they are doing community readiness assessments in all of the schools where the program is being implemented. They're also working with a team of evaluators and practitioners and school employees to document the neighborhood characteristics. So when we're talking about this, they're looking at things like alcohol density, looking at the existence of sexist ads, homophobic ads in the community. They're also doing a series of stakeholder interviews because their program involves education for parents, for teachers, for school personnel, and for students. They are doing interviews with all of those groups. This is going to be really exciting information that folks are going to be releasing probably on a similar timeline to the youth violence prevention program. One thing that I want to point out is the importance of using evaluation during implementation. And folks found that just by talking to kids on if they saw the campaign, what they thought about it, and if they talked to people about it or not, the evaluation team was able to realize that folks did all the things but talk to other people because they didn't have the skills yet to do that. So evaluation can help you make midstream adjustments to your prevention programs, like adding in some skill building to help advance the program.
Thank you, Sally. And in the interest of time, we have let folks know that they can check out the slides to see those building blocks that you included for a strong evaluation. We will also make sure that everyone is notified when we have a resource guide that includes the NSVRC evaluation toolkit available online.
Thank you so much. There's so much more to share, so please reach out.
Yes, thank you, Sally. And I think we have one final question for you in the text chat. So if you could reply to that in the text chat, that would be wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us on this, as always, jam-packed web conference. We are so thankful to our guests, to Sally, to Maury, to Patrick. Thank you all so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us and resources with us today. Thank you to our captioners for providing closed captioning for this web conference. Thank you to my colleague Ashley for assisting in the text chat and with technology. This concludes today's web conference. You will find a link in your email when the recording is available in the coming weeks. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.